Loss of trust is one of the worst things that can happen to you. And it's very important to understand what's going on, why the loss of trust is such a tremendous blow to any man. You have to understand it and you have to prepare for it, quite frankly, because you will find in life that you will lose trust in all kinds of people and institutions. And so if you know what happens, what's going on when you lose trust, then you'll be able to overcome it quicker, react better, be able to overcome this incredibly powerful blow. The first thing you have to do is understand what is a loss of trust. Quite simply, loss of trust is when you no longer believe that someone or some institution will do what you expect of them. Now, of course, what you're expecting of them is something positive, okay? The loss of trust, like for instance, if you think that a ne'er-do-well, some guy who's always like a bum and a jerk and never does anything right, he comes through with something and does something right. Well, that's obviously not a loss of trust. That's the opposite almost. That's almost like he earns trust, but not quite. But that's not important for this conversation. For this conversation, you want to understand what is a loss of trust. And you have to understand from the get-go, that is, when you are depending on someone or some group of people or some institution, and they failed you. They failed to live up to the legitimate expectation. Notice what I say there, the legitimate expectation. You see, when you trust someone, you are trusting them to do something legitimate, reasonable, okay? Like for instance, a very simple example. You get married to your wife, and there is the legitimate expectation that she's not going to cheat on you. There's a legitimate expectation that the children that you have together are going to be your children, right? And if she fails that, if there's a breach of trust in that situation, well, you see what I mean? It was not unreasonable what you were asking of the person or the group of people or the institution. What happened was that this very reasonable expectation, well, they failed it. And it's become obvious and apparent, and that's where the loss of trust comes in. When you have a loss of trust, that means that you can never depend on that person ever again. It's simple as that. And see, sometimes in a friendship, it's hard to gauge, see? Because like, for instance, in the previous example of your legitimate wife, your lawfully married wife, who cheats on you and cuckolds you and you know, stiffs you with a kid that's not yours. Well, that's very obvious. That's black and white. The problem becomes a lot of times that you have a relationship where you have what you believe to be a legitimate expectation, but the other party doesn't quite see it that way. For instance, suppose you think that some friend of yours, some guy that you know that's kind of like a friend, though it's not clear, it's a little bit ambiguous. You might think he's more of a friend than he actually is. And so all of a sudden you have money needs, say you can't make rent because of reasons, and you go up to him and you say, hey man, I need you to lend me, lend me a couple of $1,000 because reasons, and I'll pay you back, but whatever, right? And the guy's like, no, I'm not gonna lend you $2,000. I mean, what the fuck you think I am? I mean, we're buddies and all, but we're not really that close friends. In that situation, that more ambiguous situation, you see, you thought something that was not correct. You thought that you and this guy were buddies, but you weren't buddies. You are, at least in his mind, you were just casual acquaintances. And so you having the expectation that he will lend you $2,000, and him saying, hey dude, no, I mean, like, we're friends and friendly and I like you, I think you're a great guy, but I'm not gonna lend you $2,000. You see what's going on? You believe that you have lost trust in the other person, but from their point of view, you are making demands that are illegitimate. The relationship doesn't call for it. So you see how the issue of loss of trust can be ambiguous sometimes. You may believe that you are owed a legitimate expectation, that you have a legitimate expectation of the other party, or they might have that on you. I mean, it could be, flipped around, that they come at you and ask you for a couple of grand, and you're like, dude, I barely know you. I mean, we're friends and we hang out and we play, Sunday football together, but we're not really buddies. And so why are you asking me this? I mean, it goes both ways, okay? And so you have to understand the situation. You have to understand whether there is a true reciprocity insofar as the relationship. Because if there's not, if one party believes that there's like an expectation, but the other party's like, no, dude, no, we're friendly, but we're not that close friends. Well, You see the situation. You have to identify whether what you believe is a loss of trust is legitimate or not. And a lot of times we believe that a relationship might be deeper and more profound than the other party believes it to be. And so we have to gauge this. We have to examine it, and we have to be grown-ups about it, okay? We can't allow ourselves to be fooled. Like, for instance, in the case of, you asking some guy that you know because, you play, I don't know, you play football every Sunday afternoon, as a hobby, and you got a little league and shit like that, right? And you played with him for a couple of years, but, and you hang out after the game and you have a beer maybe, but you're not really, really friends now, are you? He's just some guy that you know in your football league, your amateur football league, the Sunday fun that you do. That's not a real friend. And a lot of times, you might feel that somebody is not living up to your legitimate expectations, when in fact the relationship doesn't exist. And you have to be mature enough and honest enough with yourself to realize whether that's the case. But suppose the case is really clear-cut. The wife. You're married to the wife. You stood up there at the altar with the priests and all the people there, and you said, yes, I marry you, I take this woman, blah, blah, blah. And she goes and cheats on you, right? Or the flip side, you cheat on her, see? See, that loss of trust, it can never be recovered. It can never be recovered. Because, you see, loss is like a drop of sewer in a barrel of wine. See, you have a barrel of sewer and you drop a single drop of wine and it's still going to be sewer. But you have a barrel of wine and it's perfect and pristine, and you drop a single drop of sewage into that barrel of wine, and that barrel of wine becomes sewage. Simple as that. It becomes completely contaminated. And that's the truth of a relationship where there is a clear reciprocity of commitment. Be it a marriage, be it a partnership, be it whatever. Once that trust is broken, it can never be repaired. And a lot of people whose marriages have gone tits up because one or the other cheated on them or whatnot, and they try to fix the marriage and repair the bonds of trust. It never gets recovered. Never. Because see, there's always the knowledge that if it happened once, it can happen again. And no amount of talking and negotiation and bullshit is going to change that fact. No amount of time spent together, it's never going to change, because that trust, once it's broken, it's lost, and you will always be wondering, can I trust this person again? Can I? Can I really trust this person? The simple answer is that you can't, okay? And when that happens, when that situation arises, the best thing to do is just cut off the relationship. Simple as that. When you have a strong, powerful relationship with somebody that's formal, that's clear-cut, that it's binding, it's both ways, no ambiguity, none of this bullshit, right? And the person breaks that trust, be it a business partner, being a spouse, be it whomever. After that, it's over. And so the smart thing is just to move on. There are, of course, degrees. See? It could be that you have a loss of trust that is relatively minor. I mean, it's just a simple, casual example. You're married, and you tell your wife, look, listen, honey, I really need you to be there at X corner, because I need you to pick me up in the car because reasons, and please be there on time. And she forgets, and she fucks up, okay? Well, then you realize that in that facet of the relationship, you can't really trust her now, can you? Okay? There are other things that you can trust someone with, and certain areas that you cannot. And you have to figure out what those areas of trust actually are. You have to realize, okay, in these areas, I can definitely trust my wife. Like, for instance, that she won't cheat on me and that she'll make me a good dinner. In these other areas, whereby she won't spend that much money and she'll be there when I ask her to be, because to pick me up and because I don't want to be standing in the rain after work, right? That part, I can't really trust her. And you have to recognize that. You have to recognize that what happens a lot of times is that you have certain priorities in the relationship that the other person just doesn't have, okay? The other person doesn't think that something in particular in the relationship is that big of a deal, okay? And this happens all the time. And a lot of marriages suffer needlessly because the two people have mismatched expectations as to what they can trust on. See, on the big things, like for instance, sexual infidelity, they're in agreement. But on the little things, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? A lot of times there's a mismatch of expectations. The man thinks that the woman will not spend all the money and will be there on time. And she isn't. And the woman on the flip side thinks that the man will listen to her bitching and moaning and mow the lawn and take out the garbage or some shit like that. And he doesn't. You see, there are these trivial mismatches, but you always have to remember whether they are really important or really trivial. You'll find that a lot of times these mismatches of expectations are on trivial issues. But the tragedy is that a lot of times these trivial mismatches of expectations lead to the corrosion of the relationship. And so a lot of times what you have to do is you have to make sure to explain to the other person, look, this might not be important to you, but it's really important to me. And on the flip side, of course, you have to realize that sometimes what you consider trivial, the other person thinks is very important. And you have to do it even though you yourself think it's no big deal, like taking out the garbage, for instance. For women, for some reason, it just irritates them beyond measure, okay? And you have to realize that for you, it's trivial. For them, it's not. And if you want to maintain a healthy relationship, in whatsoever the relationship might happen to be, with your coworkers or your boss or your friends or your wife or whomever, you got to match that expectation, if only to maintain the more important bonds of trust in that particular relationship. Now, what about trust in institutions, which is the reason that this particular video is on Patreon, it is not on my free channel. Because we are experiencing an incredible loss of trust in institutions. And so we should look at that. Bottom line, we can't trust any of the institutions of the West. The media, the politicians, the scientific establishment, we can't trust them. They have lost our trust. And we have to realize that they are bullshitting us. They are lying to us. And the fact is, this will continue. It will continue on into the future. And it will get worse, by the way. Because liars always need to double down on their lies. And they say one lie, and that lie is not enough. So they have to add on more lies, and it just becomes worse and worse. And we're slowly sinking into a totalitarian state, where we have the mainstream media, the politicians, and the bureaucratic establishment, including the medical establishment, which are in collusion to tyrannize the people, tyrannize you and me. That's what they're doing. Don't pretend otherwise, okay? You pretending otherwise is just sticking your head in the sand. That is what's happening right the fuck now. And so you have to realize what's going on and realize that, hey, these institutions have lost my trust. Therefore, they have lost my loyalty to them. Therefore, I have to make other arrangements. In my own case, I lost trust in institutions back in 1991. And I've said so repeatedly. When I was suspended from Dartmouth College for a full academic year for something that people knew I hadn't done, that the dean of students at Dartmouth knew I hadn't done, and yet I was suspended anyway, that's when I knew. That's when I knew I couldn't stay in the West. Because the West is corrupt. The West, I can't trust any of the institutions there. And every year it's gotten worse and worse and worse. The institutions in the United States and the Western democracies, they are corrupt. I no longer trust them. And so I prefer to live away from them. You who are seeing the emerging tyranny, I mean, come on, you're seeing it, right? This emerging tyranny that we are seeing across the Western democracies, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. See, and you have to think to yourself that you are living in the time of Russia in 1918. When the Bolsheviks took over and everybody thought, oh, it's not going to get that bad. How bad did it get? You had deliberate famines. You had millions of people shipped off to concentration camps, to forced labor camps. You had tyranny. And everybody said, oh, it's not going to get that bad. It'll get better. The tyranny in the West, it's happening right now. Yeah. And so once you have lost trust in institutions, you have to ask yourself, do I really want to stick around? I mean, really, first of all, you want to ask, Can I change these institutions? And the answer is quite obviously no. These institutions in the Western democracies, they are locked down. They are locked down tight. Nobody's pulling them out, okay? They have control of the media, they have control of the tech companies, they have control of the military. I mean, they're purging in the military in the United States everyone who disagrees with any of this bullshit that's going on, right? It's becoming a tyrannical state. You can't fight this shit, and you can't change it, because it's more powerful than any individual, it's more powerful than any collective, and any collective that tries to coalesce to fight this is nipped in the bud. There are agents provocateurs, there are infiltrators, there are basically feds getting in there and trying to break it in from the inside. And so you realize that there is simply no way to fight this shit except to leave. I made my choice. I decided to leave. And I am basically thinking of setting up something in Eastern Europe. A place where like-minded individuals can come and join me. Join me in a place that is separate from that tyranny, separate from that loss of trust. The loss of trust in our institutions cannot be repaired. And so I think it's time for decent, hardworking, industrious, adventurous men of the West to leave, because the West is no home for us, not anymore. It's time to leave and to start something fresh. Because remember, once trust is lost, it can never be regained.